Before I begin, I want to thank all our visitors for being with us. And I want to tell you that these pictures behind me mean a lot. The young couple on December 27th, 1955, were married in Lansing, Michigan. They are my mother and my father. The picture with the entire wedding party, well, I guess at least the parents of this young couple are my grandparents. I have quite a heritage. It doesn't make me any different or special than anyone else, except in that picture are my two grandfathers who were both elders, one from Nashville, Tennessee, the other from Lansing, Michigan. And my grandmother, standing next to my mom, I will say that outside of my mother and dad, she probably had the most influence on me of anyone I can think of. Only one of those people are still alive today, and that's my mom. I put that picture up there because I want you to know that what I'm going to say this morning applies to me and to everyone in here. Now, kids, children, I'm going to talk to you first this morning, and I'm going to talk to teenagers. They'll be excited about that. And then I'm going to talk to us as adults, because this is a lifelong obligation. And I'm going to tell you something, it extends beyond the life of your parents. And that's sobering. Did you hear what Jesus said when the young ruler came to him? And I believe rather earnestly, some are skeptical of that, I am not. And he asked the question, what deed must I do to have eternal life? And this might be surprising to us, but where did he begin? He began in the middle or the end of the Ten Commandments. Do we think about our salvation depending on how we treat one another? One that Jesus emphasized to the honor your father and your mother. Turn to Exodus chapter 20. You might think it's a little funny for me to do this because you all think you know this. But do you know the context of this? The context is God is on Mount Sinai. The clouds, the trumpet, the lightning, and the fire are right there. The Hebrew author tells us that it was terrifying. But God is establishing his covenant with his people Israel. He is fulfilling the promises that were made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now he announces to this people, a people he has redeemed, his expectations for them. He begins with a preamble. In 20, verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. We might be surprised at that opening, because what we might have expected him is, I am the God who created heavens and earth and all that is in them. But no. He says to them, you were slaves. You were in bondage in Egypt, and I am the God who brought you out. And now I am establishing my covenant with you. And here are the terms of that covenant. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Let me ask you, what is your impression of the 10 Commandments? Do you think of them as a list of you shall not? There's a lot of you shall not in there. But only some of the commandments are prohibitive. Some of the commandments are do commands. In Exodus 28 through 11, this is a do command. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Did you notice how that was framed? That God worked 6 days and he rested on the Sabbath. Why are they to keep it holy? Because they're to keep it holy because by resting on the Sabbath day, they are doing what God did. They are honoring him as creator. Not only are they to remember it, but they are not to work their sons or daughters, their animals, or their bondservants or slaves. Do you see what it's doing? It says the Sabbath begins with acknowledging God as the creator, and by acknowledging God as creator, it leads to the proper treatment of servants and animals and strangers. The implication here is, I rescued you out of slavery where you had to work 7 days a week, and only a slave works 7 days a week. Those who are in the image of God rest on the seventh day. The second due command is honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. There's another implication. The Sabbath day honors God as creator. God. If we are to honor our Creator by keeping the Sabbath day, then we are to honor our procreators. This command is next to remember the Sabbath day for a very important reason. If a child does not honor parental authority, he is less likely to honor divine authority. And if he doesn't honor divine authority, he will not honor you either. There is a hierarchy in life without which the moral order is unlikely. God, parent, child. Honoring parents, and I want you to understand this. On the day that they stood before Mount Sinai, they were not keeping their children in the nursery. Their children were commanded to stand there with their parents. Gideon, if you had been there, you would have been standing there with your mom and your dad. Claire, if you had been there, you would have been standing before God with your mother and your dad. God says that honoring parents would ensure that Israel did not break the covenant and lose the promised land. Is this a commandment that we need to observe today? Okay, kids, I'm telling you, right now is the part you've got to listen to. Because who am I talking to? To young children. The Apostle Paul, writing to the church at Ephesus, said in Ephesians 6, 1 through 3, you guys see this? Who's being addressed by the apostle? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. Honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land. What did honor parents mean for kids? Well, it obviously means obey, but I think there's another part. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, 1 through 3, we read, "Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it. Why should Moses teach them the command to honor their father and mother? That you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and commandments which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey." You see that? We know from other passages in Deuteronomy that it was expected that the children would teach, or the parents would teach the children about God, about what God had done for them, who He is, and what He expects of them. And here's what that means, Claire, and here's what that means, Gideon, and here's what that means, Luke, that God expects you to listen to what your parents have to say. Because what your parents have to say teaches you about who God is. How serious is God about this? In Leviticus 19, where God is teaching the people how to be holy, he says this, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to all the congregation of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Well, what do you mean? "Every one of you shall revere his mother and father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God." Well, what does God think holiness is? Holiness is it when you revere your parents. In fact, what does God put it on par with? Revering your parents is the same or on the same level with keeping my Sabbaths. You see how God expects his created order to be revered or honored? In fact, it goes farther than that. It even goes to our grandparents. When I was little, that was easy to do, because Grandma let me do things Mom did not. I got chocolate milk, chocolate pie. I can remember all the good things I got over there. Fried chicken until it came out my ears. But you see something, and this is totally gone from our culture. And I'm scared that it's gone from us. "You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man." What does God equate that with? "And you shall fear your God. I am the Lord." Does that give you pause? When I was in Chicago, old people would get on the bus and no one would get up and move for them. What does that say about the culture? That should not be true among us. "You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man." But parents implied if they are to honor, if they are to obey, then you can understand why Paul said this to the Ephesians next. "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but do what? Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Parents are God's chosen vessel to communicate respect for God. I want you to think about the awesome responsibility that you have. Getting them to respect you is how they learn to respect God. God did not intend parents to be their children's buddy. We are not peers with our children. You know, that's after they leave home. You must be the parents, not their peers. You are to act in a way that engenders respect. You know what that means? Live with your wife right. Be a person in society who engenders respect. But that also means to engender that respect and not to frustrate them, be consistent and live what you say. If you want your child to respect God, you respect God. Parents must, and this is hard, You want your children to respond to honor you? Honor your parents. They're going to live what you do, not what you say. It's guaranteed. When they are young, they need to learn that disobedience has a consequence. My father said to me, and I see the wisdom in it now, but I did not like it when I was young, I want you to be more afraid of me than what you want to do. I didn't break curfew. I did not want to find out what would happen on the other side of it. I believed him. When my dad said, when adults are talking, you don't talk, one look from across the room would wither me because I knew what was going to happen. Parents, no one wants to be overly harsh, but they must fear you enough to realize that something bad will happen if I break your rule. They will not learn to fear God unless they learn to fear you. And Proverbs tells us, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. So now I want to bring it up. Children, are you supposed to obey your mom and dad? When you obey, you honor them. But there's a stage of life, and we all go through development, and teenagers have a special challenge. It's natural for teenagers to begin to push away. What are they doing? They're beginning to try life out for themselves. And if you're a wise parent, you will give them some room to make decisions. Think of it as putting bumpers on. You can make a decision between here and here and let them make it. Sometimes they'll go to the wrong side, or at least you think it's the wrong side. But you got to give them a chance to do that. It's like birds attempting to fly and leave the nest. They still need their parents' guidance and protection. One thing I heard, and I think it's absolutely true. Parents, the most challenging time of your life are the first 5 years of your child's life and the last 5 that they're with you. Think about that. 1 through 5, 13 through 18. I guess that middle period, you've heard it before, but that's where you learn to love them. But let me tell you, by the time they're 13, they better have learned to honor and respect you, or you're in for a wild ride. A hard one. Like the younger child, teenagers are expected to obey their parents and to honor them. How serious was God about that? Well, that's a little frightening. In Exodus 21, verse 15, whoever strikes his father or his mother shall go without dinner. No. Whoever strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. And you say, well, I'm not going to hit my mom and dad. Okay. Whoever curses his mother or his father shall be put to death. I was a teenager once. You may not believe it, but I was also a baby once. And I might have said a few things under my breath about my mom and dad I should not have said. Anyone else? If I should ask for a show of hands, you know what I suspect? It's going to be pretty close to unanimous that that's happened. What does God think of that? What God is saying is teenagers who've not learned obedience as a young child may rebel against their parents, but God is not going to put up with that, because what did he command in the covenant to Israel? Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord is giving you. Now, I want you to think, when God issued that command, he issued it to the entire nation. And when he said that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, he was saying that to the entire nation. And I believe it had a twofold promise there. The first is, if the people of Israel did not teach their children to honor their mother and father and obey, then they would never do it to God, and that would lead to them breaking the covenant, and they would lose the land. So you better teach your kids to do this, or they'll lose their inheritance. But the second part of it, and teenagers, hear me well, more teenagers have died by not honoring their parents than have died by honoring their parents. Because you can do things when you're a teenager that will and can kill you. So if you want to live a long time, don't do stupid. But you saw those first. God is dead serious about this. In Deuteronomy 21, 18 through 21, he says, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they discipline, will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gate of the place where he lives. And they shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And God says, go get psychological counseling. What he says is, then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. I'll tell you what, kids, I'm glad I did not grow up under this. But you know what? Someone made the comment to a friend of mine once, well, Israel didn't do that. And he retorted quickly, and they lost the land. When people cannot understand how it is that people on social media are rejoicing over the death and shooting of a healthcare executive, where did that come from? We see it in our society. When you don't teach people to honor their parents and to obey, what becomes of that country? I'm telling you, the horse is out of the barn. But that can't be that way with us. If you don't teach your children, if you do not expect them to honor and obey you, then you may lose them to a tragedy. They may end up in jail. People like, my grandmother said stuff like that. Don't overreact. But it's true. My grandmother always stressed to me, wear clean underwear and live every day as your last, because it might be. And we don't want to be ashamed of you if you get in a car wreck. Some of the people of a certain age are laughing about that because they heard the same thing. Well, I'm done beating up on the kids. Adults should honor their parents And it gets a lot harder. Deuteronomy 27:16. Cursed be anyone. We've had strike and curse, and now cursed be anyone who dishonors his father or his mother. By the way, this was what the people of Israel were to say at Mount Ebal when they entered the land. Cursed be anyone who dishonors his father or mother, and all of the people shall say, Amen. Adults' obligation to their parents changes over time. I know several of you are going through that. I'm going through it. Mark 7. Remember what they were supposed to say on Mount Ebal? Cursed be anyone who dishonors his father or his mother. In Mark 7, Jesus is dealing with the Pharisees about their tradition. And where does Jesus go with it? And he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, whatever you would have gained from me is Corban, that is given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things you do. Do you see that? Where does Jesus go? Why are you like what you are? You don't honor your parents. You don't. In fact, you are reviling your mother and father by your silly traditions, your evil tradition, because you are not permitting a man to care for his parents. But that's precisely, when Paul talks about honoring father and mother, that is precisely his expectation of people who follow Christ. In 1 Timothy 5, a passage we try to use to prove that families ought to help family first, we're missing the big point. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. Folks, this starts when they're little. If they don't learn to honor you, if they don't see you honor your parents, what do you think is going to happen when you get old? In fact, what does God think of this? But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith. You see that? He has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Why? What's the biggest issue right now for people my age? Finding elder care for their parents. I can tell you, this wasn't really a huge issue 100 years ago because we didn't live that long. But when someone did, what was the expectation for the family? That they take care of their own. And if you don't do it, you've denied the faith. Does that sink in? That's really harsh. And we should note the command. This is an age that struggles with duty. I married a girl who was raised by Edwardian grandparents. I could not believe how often she said duty. It was her first thought. It's your duty. It's your responsibility. But we don't think we have those things if there's not an ideal relationship. It's interesting. I looked at a Jewish commentator on this. You know what he pointed out? This command says to honor your father and your mother. It does not say love, but honor. Why doesn't it use love? Because some people do not have the best relationship with their parents, because either the parents weren't loving and respectable, which we think immediately crosses our obligation off, but it doesn't. And a problematic relationship does not relieve the adult child of God's responsibility to honor their parents. It's not based on how you feel about them. Consider this. Our children are watching how we talk about and treat our parents. If we do not teach them about honoring our parents by honoring our parents, how do you think we will be treated? If we ignore our parents, what behavior are we encouraging in our children? The commentator I looked at said his grandmother was a difficult lady. But what he saw was that whenever she called, he picked up the phone. She called every night. And she berated him about something that she felt he ought to be doing, and he wasn't doing it. And he said, I watched for years as my father said, yes, yes, Ma, yes, Ma, yes, Ma. Do you want to know why he put himself through it? Because he respected his mother. He wanted to honor her. Finally, the best way to honor our parents is to live godly lives. Because how we live, I have to tell you, I still think about those people I showed you the picture of. I wonder what my dad would think of me now. Would he be proud of me? You might think, well, you're 60-something years old. Why do you care whether your father would approve of you or not? Because he tried to raise me to be a godly man. But Titus 1:6 says that how we behave reflects on our parents. This is a qualification for an elder. It says, if anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, that he can be an elder. Why is that there? Because what our children do reflects on us. What I do reflects on my mother. What I don't do reflects on my mother. And I believe it extends beyond our parents' death. If we've really learned to honor our parents, how will we live? In a way that honors them. Why should I care about this? Leviticus 19:32. You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man. When I do that, what have I learned to do? Fear the Lord your God. So the command to honor our parents is a lifetime due command. Young children should honor their parents by obeying them. Teenagers should honor their parents by obeying and listening to their instructions. And by the way, obedience is doing it when you don't want to. which when you're a teenager feels like most things. You just don't want to do it. Finally, adults should respect their parents by caring for them in old age. The Jewish commentator I looked at made this point, and I thought it was so valid I wanted to just quote it for you. Another reason, and the essential one, it is more important to honor parents than to love them. It is a beautiful thing when children love their parents, but many, perhaps most people, experience a variety of emotions toward their parents throughout their lifetimes, sometimes dependent upon the parents' behavior and sometimes dependent on their own emotional evolution and psychological makeup. The moral success, and I'll say this, the moral success of a society does not depend upon children loving parents. It does depend on children honoring their parents. If that's true for society, then it's true for us. One analogy might help you with this. I don't love the police, but I obey them. I may not love the president. That's been a big thing lately. It's going to be that way again. But I will stand up and honor him. That's not based on whether I like them or not. It's based on the position they hold. And as a Christian, I should honor my parent by overriding my feelings and will myself to help my parents, because that is agape love. Remember what John said. By this we know love, that he, Jesus, laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has this world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long. And now I'm thinking about our eternal home. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Do you want to spend an eternity with God? Do you want to spend an eternity with our brother Jesus? Then we need to obey his will. And his will for us is that we believe in his Son, and that we be conformed to his Son's image. By the way, did Jesus honor his mother and his father? He did. Let's honor the Lord by being conformed to the image of his Son. You can do that this morning by repenting of your sins, confessing that Jesus is the Son of God and that you believe that God raised him from the dead. And then you can join him in baptism, being conformed to his burial, his death, and his resurrection so that you can live for God. If we can help you do that this morning, please come to the front as together we stand and sing.